could keep whatever they grew. The governor assigned to every family a parcel of land according to the proportion of their number for that end. Bradford wrote that their experience taught them that for society as a whole, communism, or sharing all the production, was vain and a failure. This is 1623, folks. 1623. Their new incentive-based economic system was a great success. It looked like they would have an abundant harvest this time. But then, during the summer, the rain stopped, threatening the crops. The Pilgrims held a day of humiliation and prayer. The rains came and the harvest was saved. It is logical to surmise that the Pilgrims saw this as a sign from God, blessed their new economic system, because Governor Bradford proclaimed November 29th, 1623, as a day of Thanksgiving. The great economics lesson was forgotten and then discarded by the time the Plymouth colony merged with the Massachusetts Bay colony in 1691. The Pilgrims recognized that the land itself would be their common community property, but that it is proper for the fruits of the labor of each person and family to belong to those who produced them. This was the great economics lesson about incentives that the Pilgrims learned, a lesson that so impressed them that they commemorated it every year thereafter with a day of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving Day should be remembered not just as a day when we give thanks for our abundance, but more deeply and historically why we have this abundance. In our Thanksgiving Day celebrations, let us therefore tell one another the true origins of the Thanksgiving and the great economic lesson that the Pilgrims hoped we would remember. I found that very interesting, and I thought you would too. The next thing I found was on About.com. The title of the article is How FDR Changed Thanksgiving, by a young lady by the name of Jennifer Rosenberg. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt had a lot to think about in 1939. The world had been suffering from the Great Depression for a decade, and the Second World War had just erupted in Europe. On top of that, the U.S. economy continued to look bleak. So when U.S. retailers begged him to move Thanksgiving up a week to increase the shopping days before Christmas, he agreed. He probably considered it a small change. However, when FDR issued his Thanksgiving proclamation with the new date, there was an uproar throughout the country. The article also acknowledges that the first Thanksgiving was about a successful harvest in 1621. It goes on to talk about sporadic Thanksgivings were held thereafter, after 1621. The very first National Day of Thanksgiving was held in 1789. So 1789 is the first time that there was a Thanksgiving celebrated in all of the states at the time, all the colonies. Yet even after a National Day of Thanksgiving was declared in 1789, Thanksgiving was not an annual celebration. There's a lady that's known as the Mother of Thanksgiving. Her name is Sarah Josepha Hale. That's probably not a name that you're familiar with, but I know that everyone is familiar with her most famous work. She's the lady that wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb. She also was an early day blogger. She published newsletters when something fired her up, or she had an idea or something that she wanted to express. She put it into a newsletter and circulated it. Very early on. It doesn't give the dates. But it says we owe the modern concept of Thanksgiving to a woman named Sarah Josepha Hale, editor of Godey's Lady's Book and author of the famous Mary Had a Little Lamb nursery rhyme. She spent 40 years advocating for a national annual Thanksgiving holiday. In the years leading up to the Civil War, she saw the holiday as a way to infuse hope and belief in the nation and the Constitution. So when the United States was torn in half during the Civil War, and Lincoln was searching for a way to bring the nation together, he discussed the matter with Miss Hale. On October 3rd, 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued a Thanksgiving proclamation that declared the last Thursday of November, based on Washington's date, to be a day of thanksgiving and praise. For the first time, Thanksgiving became a national annual holiday with a specific date. For 75 years after that, Lincoln issued his Thanksgiving proclamation, succeeding presidents honored the tradition and annually issued their own Thanksgiving proclamation, declaring the last Thursday of November as the day of Thanksgiving. However, in 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt did not. In 1939, the last Thursday was going to be too close. It was November the 30th, too close to Christmas, was not allowing the merchants enough time to sell their Christmas wares because they previously had respected Thanksgiving and not started their Christmas sales until after Thanksgiving. As you'll note, most of that still goes on today. It is a tradition that is carried forward. We'll learn more about it in the second half. The due date for Thanksgiving caused a lot of confusion. Calendars were now incorrect. Schools who had planned vacations and tests now had to reschedule. And Thanksgiving, this is 1939, and prior to that, in the 1800s as well, Thanksgiving had been a big day for football games, as it is today. So the game schedules had to be examined, and it caused a lot of havoc and a lot of problems. Political opponents of FDR and many others questioned the president's right to change the holiday and stressed the breaking of precedent and disregard for tradition. Many believe that changing a cherished holiday just to appease businesses was not a sufficient reason for change. Atlantic City's mayor derogatorily called November 23rd as Franksgiving. And actually, in that year, FDR and the Democrats celebrated Thanksgiving on the 23rd, and a lot of Republicans celebrated it on the originally intended last Thursday, which was the 30th. So there was that great a divide back then that moving this sacred holiday caused a rift between the two. I wish that we were. I made the statement earlier that we weren't going to use any of our live foghorn leghorn. We were going to make this a fairly, I don't want to say somber occasion, but serious occasion. And we're going to keep to that. But that going back to the Democrats and the Republicans celebrating Thanksgiving on a separate day causes one to think that
there's something going on around here that just don't add up.
And that things never change. Hopefully, the second half of the show, if the first half hasn't, the second half of the show should really help uplift you. It'll give you information that I found totally interesting, and I think you will too. And it will give you a real solid foundation for what Thanksgiving truly means and what praising God and having a religious aspect to the holiday is all about. And it's not about what people who disagree with that aspect would have you think it's about. There is a thing called civil religion in the United States. I grew up with it. I think a lot of you grew up with it. We didn't know what it was called. We just knew it was there. And this final article that we're going to reference and read, and it's the only thing we're going to spend 30 minutes on, is an excellent piece of work that tells us how we started feeling that way, why it is okay to feel that way, and why we should continue to feel that way. So we will come back out of the break with our standard Charlie Daniels rock and roll, the country needs more rednecks, and we will dive into something that I think Mr. Daniels would greatly approve of. You're listening to Doc Owen. It's Thanksgiving Eve in 2013, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks. Howdy, folks. This is Doc Owen. Thank you, Mr. Daniels. We are here Thanksgiving Eve. Hope you're paying attention to what's going on in the kitchen, listening to this on the side. It'll be on the podcast. I think it's information that you should want to have at your hand. So the second half of the show, we're going to dive into an article I found in Google Scholar. The title of the article is Civil Religion in America. It's by Robert Bellah, Bellah. It is a reprint of the article that he published in a journal of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences from the issue entitled Religion in America in the winter of 1967. It's going to call back some things that have been going on this week, and for a lot of you, it'll call back things that were going on at the time, because there are those of us in the studio and in the listening audience that some of this, even being told as history, is real life to us because we lived it. So, in defense of what he says before we dive into the article, he says this chapter was written for a Daedalus conference on American religion in May 1966. It was reprinted with comments and a rejoinder in the religious situation 1968, where he defended himself against the accusation of supporting an idolatrous worship of the American nation. I think it should be clear from the text that I conceive of the central tradition of the American civil religion not as a form of national self-worship, but as the subordination of the nation to ethical principles that transcend it in terms of which it should be judged. I am convinced that every nation and every people come to some form or religious self-understanding, whether the critics like it or not. Rather than simply denounce what seems in any case inevitable, it seems more responsible to seek within the civil religious tradition for those critical principles which undercut the ever-present danger of national self-idolization. His article starts with a review of some of the text of John F. Kennedy's inaugural address of January the 20th, 1961. Well, due to the 50th commemoration of Mr. Kennedy's death, a lot of this may actually be current on your minds if you listen to any of what went on in the airways. John F. Kennedy's inaugural address of January 20th, 1961, serves as an example